Alright, you and the party have found the baby goblin. You start chasing it through the swamps. It's dashing over and under branches. The fighter is trying his best. The barbarian isn't succeeding very well. The thing is just too small and slippery. Finally, the wizard has gone wise and cast Hold Person, seizing the baby in its tracks. The party smiles as they finally capture its bounty. However, the baby is a little bit smarter than they anticipated, as snarls and growls and jeers surround them. The party look around to see the rest of the goblin tribe surrounding them. Small creatures, don't you just love them? Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Quasar, and welcome to tonight's episode of Dungeons and Dragons and Discussions. And tonight we are talking about small creatures or characters, however you want to take it. We're talking like, gnomes, halflings, dwarves, goblins. I'm sure there's all sorts of other things that I'm missing, but whatever, that's okay. We have a question regarding their size. Size does matter. Let me just say that right now. But in a way that you're not expecting. So let me get the guest stars on right here. All right, I don't know which way it's going to be. All right, it's going to be on the left. On your left is our friend Micah. And the voice from beyond below us is Grace. Thank you, girls, for joining me tonight.
Yeah, I'm
Thanks
excited.
for having us.
No problem. All right, so the question I have for you two tonight can be take it as simple or hard. I'm not sure how you want to take it. But it is this. Should smaller creatures have a higher AC because they're harder to hit? So the reason I'm asking this is I feel like I should detach myself from this because all my questions originate from me watching a Critical Role episode. And one of the things, I don't know if it transpires over to anything else, is that let's say someone is prone, right? And the Dungeon Master is like, oh, well, if you want to hit them with a ranged attack, it's harder to hit them because they're a smaller target. So I thought of this like, so wait, shouldn't smaller creatures also get a bonus to their AC because they are a smaller target of some sorts?
Well, I think to answer that question, where my head is going first is the converse. Does a dragon get AC penalties because it's easier to hit? Because there is a lot of mass to it. You're unlikely to miss it.
Yeah.
What matters is can you hit it where it counts, where it matters. It's where damage and resistance come in. So I think if you're starting to play size into AC, it should literally be, can you literally hit this person? Or does the armor of that person matter? So I think it's called armor class for a reason. I don't think being small and slippery is part of armor. So I'm kind of on the side of no.
Okay.
But I'm interested to see where this discussion goes.
Yeah. Grace, what is your thoughts?
Well, I'm in agreement with Micah. I say no because, like Micah started to discuss, for me, armor is based upon the, fortitude of that character, of that person or thing. And their size, so looking at it from a principle perspective, a gnome is not going to be as tough and sturdy physically as any bigger creature like the dragon. A dragon's going to be able to take a hit a lot better than a gnome, but the gnome is harder to hit. So I think the smaller creature should not get a boost to AC, but whoever's trying to hit that small creature gets a disadvantage to hit. Because if it's all about hitting the creature, that has to fall on the person trying to hit the creature, not the creature itself.
Okay, all right. I like that.
I think if you were, sorry.
No, go right ahead.
I think part of the AC formula already takes into consideration your dex, right? So maybe instead of saying, hey, let's give a bonus to the armor class, why don't we give a bonus to dex? And a lot of these racial features do take certain things into consideration like that. And maybe what we need to look at is these smaller creatures. How much smaller are they? Because maybe like comparing a gnome to a dwarf, that's not exactly the same. They have different builds. They're still in the same class, but would you say that a dwarf is necessarily more slippery than a gnome or a halfling? I'm not sure I would make that connection just because of how people have played dwarves, but I I think racial ability modifiers can play into AC without saying you're just naturally more armored, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I yes, I agree, but my job here is to play devil's advocate, right?
Yes,
I'm
of course.
supposed to make you guys think. So here's what I'm gonna say, right? So what stat booster goes into armor? It's your dexterity, right? So it's not your strength, it's not your constitution, it's your dex. And dex plays into things like, acrobatics and sleight of hand. Basically, how quick you can be, right? So let's say that a smaller creature, I mean, your armor class is, your AC is armor class. But maybe since it's dex based for how much armor you have, or armor, maybe it plays into how quick you are. Your AC class could be transpired into your actual armor, but also your ability to dodge attacks, and that's why it's dex versus like you having your strength play into it. And of course, barbarians, we all love them. They have their constitution play it. Yes, constitution play into their unnatural armor based thing, their unarmored defense. So barbarians are a different story, but dex does play into their armor class. So maybe that means that they dodge better, and in that case, should small creatures have like a plus to that because they are more slippery and more smaller?
Well, I think for me, I'm going back to the intention of this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say there's two parts to the AC. There's the actual armor you're wearing, and there's the dex. I think honestly, the ideal system would have something built in where there's two components to if how you're taking a hit. One of them is dex based. Can they land a hit on you because of your skill in dodging or just being aware and positioning? And if they do land because of that, how well does that penetrate armor if you're wearing it? So there's two factors there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That complicates the game, and combat is already pretty sluggish in a lot of campaigns compared to like RP moments and stuff like that. So like remember, like one round is 6 seconds, but there could be up to 6 people plus enemies interacting at that time. It takes a long time, so we don't want to necessarily make 2 rolls to figure out who's being hit, right?
Yeah.
So I think the intention behind armor class was to say, okay, well, armor should matter the most because that's what people are usually upgrading. They can swap it out a lot faster than upgrading their abilities, which takes 4 levels to do. And that's if they don't take a feat, right? So armor should have a bigger impact. That's what people are interacting with more in the game.
Unless you're a variant human and they are special.
Yes. They're
that's a different conversation. That's a different conversation to have, because I have a lot of friends. It's like, why would you play a variant human? It's so lame because I want the beginning feat. Gosh darn it, that's why. Different
That's
conversation.
why everyone does.
Different conversation for a different time. Grace, let's get your 2 cents on this.
Yeah, so my opinion is still no, because I've always had this little gripe, I guess, with D&D in regards to the certain racial features they get, because in my experience, smaller creatures are not as dexterous as bigger creatures.
Oh.
For example, I could outrun a child any day.
Oh, so so wait a minute. So you're trying to argue that smaller creatures are easier to hit? What? No, what? Because they're slower?
Yes and no. I feel like it's kind of a net zero. They're harder to hit in stature, but they can't run away easy enough. So like, let's say you're a ranger or whatever, like you've got a bow of some kind and they're in range. It's not like the far range one where you've got disadvantage. Like they're in your range. If you're a good aim, like if you're applying real world principles, you'll be able to hit the gnome or the dwarf or the goblin pretty easily. And especially if it's in like a prairie or an open field or something,
no cover,
they have nowhere to hide. And although they're small, those small little legs can't get them that far that fast. And I think Dex has to account for everything. And when I think of dexterity in the real world, I'm thinking about like agility and what all. And I don't think about small statured things being very like agility oriented.
Okay. All right. I got another question to throw at you. So, cool. All right. I agree. That sounds plausible. That sounds very, very accurate right here. I do have to ask about like what about creatures? What about creatures? Right? Like we're talking about character races. I have family down in the south, right? Whenever I go down there, my favorite thing to do with my cousins is to catch lizards, right? Let me tell you, have you ever tried to catch a little tiny lizard right there? I know this is different because we're talking about like, a fairly good sized person versus a really tiny lizard, so that's different, and I'm sure there are mechanics applied to that. But those suckers move fast. So, I mean, we're talking like things like a gnome or a dwarf. Forgive me if I'm getting this mistaken. They are a like magical type of race, correct? Very sort of kind of.
Gnomes, they have a flavor of magic to them.
Yeah. So in that aspect, I'm like to think of like this: gnomes, dwarves, halflings, whatever. I'm not bashing midgets or kids at all, but kids haven't grown up. They are like slower, and because kids haven't grown up. But gnomes, halflings, and dwarves, that's what they're like. So they're full grown. Yeah, sure, they're going to be slower because they're not as tall as a bigger person, but they're not going to be like have the hand-eye coordination as a 2-year-old or a toddler. You know what I'm saying?
Well, if you go back to the lizard example you had, we've also got small creatures that can't move as quickly. There's a lot of turtles that you could pick up.
Darn it! I walked into that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna completely throw away that whole logical argument because we also have, if you were to say in animals, a lot of people who hunt will hunt fowl. Those are tiny, those move fast, but you learn how to track, right? There's also people who hunt bears. I think they're just as easy to hit or difficult to hit for different reasons, right? The smaller creatures that do move faster, you know what to expect, you adjust. The bigger creatures, it's more about finding them, not letting them see you, and you have to have the right equipment to get through their natural armor, to say, like for a big bear. So I think I'm still on the side of we're not making adjustments. Dexterity comes into play. The equipment that you have comes into play already.
All right.
And the range that you're working in also comes to play.
All right. I think I'm stumped here, but Grace, just put me in the ground right here. Let me hear your final thoughts.
I don't think I have anything new to give. I was going to give the same argument about how you spoke about the lizards. Like, yes, small animals like rabbits and what all are fast, but there are other things that are just as small but difficult to catch. And then I think Micah brought up a really good point about how bigger things are hard to hit for very different reasons. And for me, like this, I know AC is based upon Dex, But when I think of armor, like I'm thinking about stuff that's kind of not as innate as AC really is. Like obviously I know different races and classes have different innate AC and what all. But armor is armor. You can get better armor externally. So I really feel like in this theory you're trying to put about whether or not small things should get disadvantages, I go back to thinking that that has to fall on the person trying, like the shooter, not the shootee.
Gotcha. Well, we are out of time, so let me just ask. Let me get the full question right here. Are smaller creatures hard? Do smaller creatures have a higher AC because they're hard to hit? Yes or no?
No.
No.
All right. Well, I still like small creatures, and everyone out there, thank you for joining us. Small creatures, they do have their benefits. Maybe just not in combat as much as I was hoping for. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you, Micah and Grace, for coming out here to discuss. I have to go through, but I think this is the first no for the questions that I've asked. I'm kind of shocked. I thought this was going to be a much bigger discussion, but you guys are set in your ways, for crying out loud. I fail my job as the devil's advocate. Whatever. All right.
Maybe we've already thought through it.
Ah, how dare you? You came planned. All right. Thank you two for coming out, and for everyone out that is watching, thank you as well. Have a good night.